What are the best landscape photography camera settings for you? Coming up next, and we are almost at 50 subscribers. So thank you each one of you for subscribing to my channel, and hopefully we will grow from here. And if you are new here, don't forget to subscribe, check out the vlog playlist for all the other episodes, and if you like the content, subscribe. Today I am at Purekari, which is really close to my parents' farmhouse, and it should be a familiar place for me, but to be honest, I have never been here. I don't know why, but now I'm here. But let's talk about the best camera settings for your camera. If I would say to you that the best camera settings are like ISO 100, the f-stop should be like f11, shutter speed at 1 second, the focal range of the lens should be at 50mm, then I would be talking total bullcrap. To be honest, it's not that simple, but it's not that hard either. So I'm gonna take it apart piece by piece and tell what settings to use and what to expect when you use them. So as I'm searching for the first image of the day, I'm gonna take apart what makes an image altogether in a camera. So yeah, that happened. But anyways, let's continue. What are the parts that make an image, or what are the settings that you control in your camera that make the image? You have ISO, then you have the f-stop or the aperture value, then you have your focal length or the choice of your lens, and finally a really important part is the shutter speed. So let's start from the beginning with ISO. So before I will start to talk about ISO and other parts of the image equation, I found my first image. The problem is that it said in the forecast that there's going to be clouds, like big nice fluffy clouds and everything, but there's no cloud in sight today. And for this image it's really hard. I have some hope because there are some misty clouds on the horizon. I need to wait until the sun is about to set, or like 5 to 10 minutes before that, and hope that they will start giving me some colors, because otherwise this image will not work. The camera is set up for the shot later on, but let's start with ISO. So what is ISO? ISO is the sensitivity that your camera sensor captures the light. So the higher the ISO is, the more light it can absorb. But the downside of it is the higher up you push ISO, the more noise you will introduce into your image. And as landscape photography usually is really an edited form of photography, you want the image out of the camera to be as clean as possible. Most of the time, for me at least, the ISO stays at ISO 64 or maybe ISO 100 or ISO 200, but I don't want to push the image more than that, because I usually edit my images kind of heavy-handedly, and all the grain and noise that you will introduce by upping the ISO, it makes it so much harder to, let's say, edit your images cleanly afterwards. So that's ISO. I will show you an example how ISO works. So imagine that I'm using my DSLR to record this at the moment, and let's say my ISO is at 100, at 1000, at 3200, 6400, let's say 12,000. So you can see how the noise level goes up, and the image at one point is not even usable. The light is getting a lot better at the moment, and I hope I can get the image in 10-15 minutes. So aperture and f-stop, they are kind of used really like one and the same thing, but actually they are not. Aperture is the physical thing inside your camera, which consists of leaflets that open and close, and f-stop represents the value or the amount, how much it's closed or how much is open. So if you have for let's say a lens that is f2.8, really open at its maximum, and you can close it down, let's say, until f22, so there's only basically a small hole that lets light in to the sensor. But what does it mean for your camera, and what does it mean for your image, and how you can use it? F-stop and aperture in combination control two things. They control the amount of light that hits your sensor, and they control the field of depth that you can get in your image. For example, if you want everything to be pin sharp, so as I was listening to my speech, I understood it's a bit confusing. So in simple terms, if you want your images pin sharp, close down your aperture for, let's say, f11, f14, and if you want a creamy background and separate the subject in your image, then use f-stop f2.8 or even lower if you want. In short, just open up your aperture. Another thing to keep your mind on when using or changing your f-stop values is a really good idea to find out what is your actual lens's sweet spot. And how you can find out what's the sweet spot? You can go to the forums and look for the medium, what people have found, what's the sharpest and the most detailed f-stop for that lens. Or you can just test it. Put a picture on the wall and use start from, let's say, f4 until f14, and take the images, put them into your computer, open them up, zoom in, and just scroll them up and down, and you can see where the sharpness starts to fall off and where is the actual sharpest image. Maybe for your lens it's f8, maybe it's f9, maybe it's something else. But try and test it out, and I can guarantee that your images will be a bit more detailed and a bit more sharp. So there's a bit more color, but still not enough, so let's wait. But let's talk about the third part of the exposure triangle, and that is shutter speed. So what is shutter speed and how can you use it for artistic expression? It controls how short or how long is your exposure, and that, in other words, controls your image or how it will start to look. If you use a really short shutter speed, everything is freezed in time, nothing is moving, you don't have any blur, everything is pin sharp. And for example, if you use a shutter speed of, let's say, 15 seconds, 30 seconds, even more if we're talking about extreme long exposure photography, like 10 minutes, then everything that moves in the image gets blurred out. So you can use it in many ways. For example, you can use it to disappear people from an image if you're doing a city shot somewhere. If you can do like let's say 10-15 minutes long exposure, because people usually by that time move, and as the exposure goes on, as they move to a new place, it will balance it out and it will just poof, disappear all the people from the image. I will quickly give you some examples of different images and different exposure times or shutter speeds. Before I continue, I will quickly try to do my image for today. and see what we will get. We have some color, but to be honest, it's not that much. I'll try to do my best. This image I will make in 2 parts because I want to freeze all the flowers and foliage on the foreground, and I want the longer exposure for the water and the sky behind it. So I'll take 2 images. I'll do an exposure bracket for both of them. I usually do because it kind of doesn't let me do that much errors in exposure, so I have a bit of option to choose from at home. So I'm at f11. The shutter speed is for the shorter exposure is about 1/200 of a second. The ISO is 400, and for the longer exposure I'm gonna try to go probably up to 10 seconds. The f-stop is gonna stay the same, and ISO is going to ISO L 1.0, which is about 2 stops below my native ISO of this camera. The camera is exposing at the moment for the shot, but the last part is your focal length or the lens you use, because maybe you use fixed focal length lenses, or maybe you use zooms. It doesn't really matter, and I can't tell you what to use. That's artistic choice, and that's for you to decide how you want your image to look or how not. There are just some things to point out when using different lenses. Usually fixed lenses are a bit sharper and zooms are a bit softer on one end, or let's say the shorter end or the longer end, but that all depends. When you go up in price, usually zooms are as good as fixed lenses and there's no perceivable difference anymore. But you know, in short, lens choice or focal length choice is artistic choice, and just look what you're photographing and try different focal length for each location that you go to. So I think I got the image. I couldn't record at the time I was shooting because the sun was fading away so fast, but I made 2 exposures. One was at ISO 64 and it was about 15 seconds, and the other one was at ISO 800 and that was 1/50th of a second. I would have liked a bit more speed with the shutter, but I didn't want to push the ISO over 1000, and so let's see. Hopefully the image turned out and hopefully you like it. So here's the image. I'm gonna pack up my things for today because there's not going to be more light or more light. So sad, because this is the first time for a week that I have had a chance to come out, but there's always tomorrow or maybe a day after that, because it has promised like cloudy and unstable weather for the end of the week, so fingers crossed. I'm gonna back up and start back to the car, and then I'm gonna do a small recap about the things that I just talked. Let's do a recap. What are the best settings for landscape photography? For ISO Usually try to use the lowest ISO as you can. Usually the native ISO of your camera works really well, and then you don't need to worry about noise or grain or problems coming up when you actually start editing your image in Lightroom or Photoshop or Capture One or whatever software you are using. Aperture, I think, is a tricky one in the sense that I can't give you a recommendation. I can only recommend for you to use the sweet spot of your lens if possible. If not, what can you do? But the main thing is try to avoid the extreme ends of your lens. So that means don't use your lens all the way closed down, let's say to f14 or 16 or f22, because that can insert lens diffraction to your image, which makes your image just a bit less sharp and a bit muddy. And usually if you go all the way open, the first stop that your lens has, let's say my Nikon D850 is 2.8 lens. Usually the 2.8 is not the sharpest aperture value for this lens. Go a stop or two up that and the image will be better. But if you're not a pixel peeper like I am, then it's not a problem for you. Thirdly is the shutter speed. The shutter speed doesn't really matter what shutter speed you use. It's purely artistic choice. And if you want everything in motion to be freezed, use a shutter speed more than, let's say, 1/200th of a second. If you're okay, we are at the moment talking about landscape photography, but for example, if you're shooting birds that are flying, use 1/1000th of a second or 1/2000th of a second or something similar to that to freeze the motion. And if you want, for example, water to get blurry and creamy and moving leaves to be blurry on the trees, then use a slower shutter speed. Use, for example, 1 second, 2 seconds, 30 seconds. And when you, for example, want to do a long exposure of water or a stream, don't crank your shutter speed up to 30 seconds on the first try. It may look cool, but try different shutter speeds also. Try 1 second, try 2 seconds. They all make the image look a bit different. So just experiment. And lastly, the lens choice is purely up to you. It's artistic choice. Don't listen to anyone if someone tells you that use this focal length or use that focal length. All focal lengths are good if the subject matter is right for that focal length. So now that I am at my car, is there a magic pill or magic number for the best settings for your camera to take landscape images? No, there are not. It all depends on the situation, on the landscape, on the light, on your mood and what you want to accomplish with the image. But I hope I have given you some idea where to start, and hopefully it works for you. So happy hunting and see you next time. So I'm driving home now and just wanted to say thank you for watching this episodes, and if you like the content, subscribe, like, comment, everything helps. And if you have any suggestions what you want to see on this channel in the future, just put everything down in the comments and I'll be sure to reply to you as fast as possible. And if it's possible, I will listen to your advice and do an episode on things that interest you. So thanks guys, and see you next time.